In the UK, we had a comedian. His name was Les Dawson. What was perhaps his most well-loved routine was when he played the piano badly. You have to be an accomplished musician in order to know all the right, wrong chords in order to play a piece of music badly and make it sound funny as hell. And he was an accomplished pianist. And yeah, look him up. Yeah, watch some of the videos. But we're pretty much going to be going along the same veins. We're going to be breaking some rules, but in order to break those rules, it's best if we know the rules that we're going to be breaking in the first place, which is why this is going to be a multi-parter. So I'm going to embark on a project. I think it'll work. I don't think that I'm going to get caught short, but at the same time I'm probably going to dissuade you from actually going down this path. So what are we going to be doing? It's a bit of a project that I've been promising for quite a few months now, and in that time I've been thinking quite a bit about this. Originally I was all, yeah, this sounds sensible, and the more I thought about it, I think, ouch. So what are we going to be doing? Well, there's many people following this channel who, like me, throughout the course of what we do, we end up with a collection of odd hard drives. Different sizes, different speeds, all that sort of thing. But we don't throw them away because they still work, you know? And over the last few years I've seen a number of people and they've managed to get their hands on tower cases. And in some cases, tower cases with redundant power supplies. And I think I don't think I've actually seen anybody actually make decent use of the tower cases that they've come across. So I thought, right, how about a project to actually put those hard drives into a tower case and make use of them? Using RAID. In case you don't know, redundant array of inexpensive disks. Well, these certainly are inexpensive disks because they're just lying around doing nothing. And having redundancy or resilience in the mix is probably going to be very much required if you're dealing with drives which, let's face it, they've done a useful task for a number of years. So how are we going to pull this one off? So we're going to go through the journey that I went through, because a number of the options that are available then are still available now, but they come with gotchas, which don't typically get discussed very much. And people only find out the gotchas, like I did, when things go wrong, and then you got trouble. So we're going to go to the 90s, and when most people are using Windows 95, Windows 98, in the server room we're using what's called Windows NT, known as the NT engine. While Windows 95, 98 and that ilk all sat on top of the operating system we called DOS. You know, you'd put your 3 DOS disks in first, load the operating system, and then Windows would be installed on top of it as if it was an application. NT was a totally different beast, and indeed at some point Windows NT, Windows 2000, 95, 98, ME, XP. Yeah, I think when XP became Windows 7, I think that's when the desktop version of Windows went over to the NT engine, which is why there was a lot of software problems and incompatibilities when people shifted from XP to Windows 7, because Windows 7 was using the NT engine. I am simplifying a few things here, but that's pretty much what we're looking at. One of the things about Windows NT was that it could you could use software RAID. There were RAID functions built into the operating system. Software RAID, as opposed to hardware RAID. Hardware RAID, and I did have a hardware RAID card at one point which used SCSI disks, small computer small computer system interchange or something like that, SCSI, and the card, the RAID card, was a computer in itself, basically. It handled all the hard drives you attached to it, and I think we're talking about ultra wide SCSI at that point. Ultra wide SCSI 2 or something. There were a number of different versions of SCSI, but basically it handled all the hard drives, and it presented one volume to the operating system, or however many volumes you decided to mash these drives into. But for the home user, you know, the poor end user who couldn't afford these cards because they were seriously expensive, as were the SCSI drives, we had this software RAID, a RAID which was taken care of by the operating system. Now that RAID function, I think, is still in the NT engine, and I think you can probably find it under Windows 10 and Windows 11 today. But there was a gotcha. Windows NT was not exactly the most stable of operating systems. And being software RAID, the definition of the RAID set was kept in the operating system. So if the OS went tits and you had to reinstall it, there was no way you could say, well, the drives are there, and Windows NT would just go, oh, new drives, oh yeah, can't see, no data on them. So there was a file in a particular location. You had to take that file off and keep it safe, because as inevitably the day would come when you would have to reinstall Windows NT, you had to put that file back before Windows NT would say, oh, those disks, they were RAID, yep, this is, yeah, okay, there's the volume, all done. So you had to be very careful where the definition of the RAID set was actually kept. And if you decide to use software RAID within Windows 10, 11, whatever, keep that in mind. Where the file is now, I have not got a clue, but that is something that you need to be aware of. Fortunately, the more recent operating systems are a bit more stable, but they can still go tits up if you get a Windows update that goes bad, and they are still happening these days. So there you go. So we did that, but there was a need to go a bit further. There is something around here, where is it? There we go. And that was, while the pros had dedicated RAID cards, you could get your hands on a RAID card. This is, as you can see, you've got about 6 SATA ports up there. There's a chip on board here. This isn't actually a RAID card, I don't think. I don't think this is capable of RAID, but I'll be using this anyway for the ports. But you could get versions of these cards, and on there would be software on board. When the system booted, the software would install itself into the BIOS, well, not straight into the BIOS, it would load in, and again, it was software RAID. Like Windows NT, it was all software driven. Even though it was on a card, it was all software which was being run. And it was fine, except for 2 problems. One of which is that cards were usually cheap. which meant that the user interfaces were crap. I actually lost a RAID set because a disk had died, but I couldn't work out from the card itself. What it was telling me was all cheap user interface garbage, and I pulled the wrong drive and I toasted the set. Haha. But again, it is also software RAID, and this was in the early 2000s. These chips still exist today, and they are on motherboards. So if you go into your motherboard's BIOS and there is a RAID setting for your SATA, it's typically going to be software RAID like these cards used to be. If you decide to use it, I would recommend only using RAID 1, mirroring. In the case of RAID 5 or RAID 0, what happens is the disks can't stand alone. In RAID 1, where you just have two drives, one of which is mirroring the other, then the odds are that you can take one of those drives, put it in another machine, and the machine will be able to read it. The odds are. Test it if you intend to rely on it. And also have a look at the UI, at the user interface. Make sure you can tell which drive is which. And also make sure that you load the correct drivers for your operating system. Because if something goes wrong, you need to know that it goes wrong before it becomes catastrophe. Because if you've got multiple drives, if one has gone down, the card will know that something's gone down, but the operating system may not. It's not until you lose the other one as well that the operating system goes, where's the volume, where's the data? That is too late of a time to know. So make sure that if you're using RAID on a motherboard or on a card, that you have the necessary drivers so that if something happens, the operating system will alert you. You can test this by just pulling one of the drives. Nasty way of doing it, but it can be done. It's always worth testing and checking that you can restore before it comes to the point where you need it, because when you need it, that's not the time to learn how to restore things and what your options are. That's way too late. So that's pretty much about that. The other thing is, again, in about mid-2000, I was on a course with a company called Sun Microsystems. Many people who haven't been in a commercial environment will not know Sun Microsystems. Sun Microsystems was around for many years and had an awful lot of very clever people, groundbreakers. Unfortunately, they were taken over by a company called Oracle. Oracle swiftly reversed some of the goodness that Sun Microsystems had done and shelved quite a few things. So, I think the world, personally I think the world is more the poor without Sun Microsystems, but one of the things is that they had an operating system called Solaris. So like you have Microsoft Windows, you have Sun Solaris. This is my course certificate for Solaris. The certificate was issued in the end of 2005, and that was for Solaris 9, but it was actually in the middle of the year. I was actually in London at the time when the terror strike happened and all our mobile phones just stopped working. And a short time later, a few years later in fact, that was 2005, wasn't it? Yes, that was 2005. A few years later, in 2009, I went on the Solaris course for Solaris 10. Now, on the Solaris 9 course, I was introduced to something which really made my eyes go big, and that was something called ZFS. It's now pretty much the darling of many people who are involved with servers, RAID systems of that nature, and rightfully so. I think it took quite some time for many people to actually realise what ZFS could do. It's growing. It's still growing. I don't think it is owned by Oracle anymore. I think it was among the technologies which was basically open sourced by Sun engineers, and yeah. Sun brought out, as well as Solaris, they had a version called Open Solaris, which you could use at home. It would work on, as well as Solaris would pretty much work on their own processors. They had their own processors called Spark workstations. It's got the Spark processor in it. But the Open Solaris would work on i386. So you could load it on a home machine, on a home server, and it would work. It would work on Intel and compatible 386 technology. Unfortunately, when Oracle took it over, bloody hellfire. Where are we? 1652. Mr. Kenser.
Yeah, you're doing correct.
Okay, to 18 minutes. That's going to be a nice little editing job for me. So where was I? Yeah. ZFS came on the scene, and it differed from the previous solutions that we had at our level in one critical aspect. But when Oracle took over Sun Microsystems, they changed the license for Open Solaris, so you could no longer use it for production environments. The exact definition of production environments was a bit woolly. If you were using it at home for personal use, but it was an always-on machine, as in you weren't using testing and development on it, you were using it as an active machine, does that constitute production? And given the attitude and history and reputation of Big Red, as they are known, Oracle, IBM are known as Big Blue, and Oracle are known as Big Red. People didn't want to take the chances. So as a result, Open Solaris was forked quite a few ways. ZFS was also sort of forked. I went for Open Indiana. So, you know, knowledgeable people were looking after Open Indiana. A lot of the skilled staff from Sun Microsystems departed Sun Microsystems when Oracle took it over. That's pretty much how bad it was. And obviously Oracle has killed the Spark architecture, killed the processor. Solaris, I think, it is not going forward in any great leaps or bounds, which is a shame, because they did all sorts of things, including Zones, which was the Solaris version of virtualization, which is quite innovative again. But yeah, thanks a lot, Oracle. So my primary server here is Open Indiana, but for this project we are going to be using Linux. ZFS has not really been on Linux for some time. It was only relatively recent that it's been, it was more or less kept as a slightly outsider, and the reason for that was there was an incompatibility between the license for ZFS and the license for Linux itself. So for ZFS to be baked into the Linux kernel was a bit awkward. I still don't 100% think that it's baked into the kernel. It's still very much a bit of an add-on, although I think that the licensing sides mean that it is able to get closer to the kernel when you install it. So as of time, it is getting faster and more efficient, and ZFS itself continues to be developed. But in order open Indiana, the root partition itself is ZFS, which gives a lot of power. But we're going to leave that pretty much where it is, and we're going to concentrate on the data side of things, and what we're going to do in terms of the RAID issue. So that's pretty much how all this came to happen. ZFS itself was actually in Apple's operating systems for about a year or two before they removed it. Not 100% sure why. You can probably look that up. But what ZFS does is the set definitions are stored on the drives. So you're not reliant on the controller. You could replace the controller with another one if you like. You could transfer the drives to another machine. Whatever, doesn't matter. I can take a load of hard drives off the SATA controller, put them into a SATA to USB thing, hook it all up, and the operating system will say, oh yes, that's a RAID set, I can bring that, I can use that. And I can just toast the, toast the operating system. I can put it on a completely different operating system. As long as it understands ZFS, it can see the RAID set, and it will work. That was a game changer, because it basically took out the single point of failure aspect of either the operating system losing the configuration file or the software RAID controller card losing the configuration file. Yeah. So there you are on that. That's how I came to use ZFS, how I've come to basically rely on it for my home systems, because it doesn't cost me an absolute fortune, and I find it to be resilient. Again, none of this stuff, it is still software RAID. It is in no way going to come close to the performance of a traditional hardware RAID card, which costs an arm and 6 legs. But that's where we are. An awful lot of systems now are using ZFS, and they're reasonably punchy. There's reasonable performance, and some of that performance is down to how you configure things. But we shall come on to that. So why am I against some of this stuff? Well, hard drives, when you're running multiples of these puppies, they will chew power. They're physical drives. There's a high precision motor in there. You've got the heads, and it's pretty delicate stuff. In the early days, the first hard drives that I was working on were Winchester drives. These are known as half-height drives, because the first drives in the day were full height. The issue of full height, half height didn't actually come in until half height drives were really invented. And so the old Winchester drives were double the height of this, and the early ones were, was it RFL, the interface? There were two cables, two ribbon cables, one for the address data and one for the data. And the actuator was a stepper motor, so you'd actually have heads, and if you've seen inside of a floppy disk, that's effectively what the hard drive was doing. The heads were being driven by a stepper motor to the particular track, you used to have to actually low-level format a new hard drive. Plug it onto the controller and then low-level format it so that the controller had control of the stepper motor and knew what was going on. Back 35 years ago, the tolerances were such that if that is the gap between the head and the surface of the drive, then that was the thickness of a human hair. Pretty intense. 35 years ago, that's the kind of tolerances that these were running at. What eventually happened as they increased the capacity of the drives was that, and the speed, was that these are metal, and with the high speeds that they were running at, there was enough expansion and contraction in the platters with the heat so that a stepper motor could go to a particular location expecting to find a certain data, and it wasn't there because the disk had expanded and the track information had gone a little bit off. So the head couldn't read it. And that's what resulted in what's known as voice coil actuators. So these can be precisely controlled, and there is also a magnet which will hold it off. Where's the magnet? Where's the actuator? There's the magnet. The magnet's actually there. So one of the things that's actually held in there now, and that would actually take a reasonable amount of force to get the head off. And that's pretty much what happens when you actually, if you actually judder one of these things when they're running, because they're running pretty fast. The average hard disk is still running at about 5,400 revolutions per minute. That's fast. And the faster drives are running at over 7,000 revs per minute. That's very fast. Because the tolerances that we're talking about, if you nudged a drive when it's operating, there's a fair chance that that head is going to end up crashing against the surface, and you're going to lose magnetic surface and you're going to lose your data. That's one reason why there's the later versions had gyroscopes on board, so that the minute that it detected, and particularly in laptop drives, so the minute that it detected that it had been juddered, the first thing it did, whack, was immediately park the head before, and hope to do it before any vibration could have potentially caused a head crash. So that's what these are made of. That's how they work. The tolerances are very fine. In response to that, they have a finite life. They chew an awful lot of power to make the motors run and all the rest of it, and they generate a fair chunk of heat. And I've actually asked a question of the Open Indiana group to find out tolerances, and I'll include that in some of the later videos. But that's pretty much, when you're dealing with disparate hard drives, they've already done a chunk of work. The remaining life that they've got left is a bit questionable. I would expect somewhere between 3 to 7 years, 5 on average for a hard drive. And with many hard drives that are actually put into RAID systems, they're on 24/7. They're always running. Sometimes they will, if nothing is happening, they'll just wind down and then spark back up again when they're needed. Particularly things like the reds and greens. Western Digital reds are made for RAID systems, so they're made to shut themselves down, and the greens were ecological drives. I don't think there are that many greens around now. I don't recall having seen any, but again, they would spin themselves down to save wear and tear and lifespan. And you can actually, with the smart technology that's on many of these controllers, you can actually query the drive and find out how long it has been working for. And other things. The smart information can usually tell things like if there have been any redirected sectors, if stuff has been marked as bad and it's had to put the information somewhere else. which it can do. Modern hard drives have usually a bank of sectors which are not used, particularly to keep things running. So if it spots a bad sector, if something's going wrong, if it's starting to fail, it can put it somewhere else in order so that it's there, rather than just cease operation immediately. And there's only a certain limit to this, and if you start to see those figures going up, then yeah, replace the drive. So it does pay to watch the smart information every now and then, which can give you a heads up of what if a drive is about to die. So what you're dealing with disparate drives is you're dealing with drives which are going to chew a lot of power. They're already probably at the end of their life, and do you want to run the risk of putting data on them? To that, only you can make that decision. It depends on what you want to use it for. I mean, some people would make it, put data on it, and then shut it down again. Quite useful as an online backup system, rather than what I do, which is buy larger hard drives and then back up to the larger hard drives. It's going to be up to you whether or not this is any use to you. There are two other systems which you could consider. One of them, as we pretty much know, is M.2. This is an M.2 drive which is actually on a USB adapter. M.2 drives, there aren't many of them around. There aren't many slots available on many motherboards in order to take them. So you have to be a bit careful. It's purely understandable because these puppies get very hot very fast, even if they're not doing that much. And yeah, like SSDs, you have to be careful with them, with what you're doing, the statistics of them, how long they're going to last, and all the rest of that jazz. You can get things like this, which will mount them on USB. Are you necessarily, that is USB 3, are you necessarily going to get the throughput? Who knows? But these sorts of things do enable you to get some of these drives and attach them to something like a Raspberry Pi if you wanted. A Raspberry Pi with 4 USB slots, you could put one in each slot and make the most of it. It's possible. Wouldn't say that I'd necessarily do that, but you do have those options. The trick is that relative to the amount of storage, they are still costing a fair chunk. And yeah, that's a fair chunk of heat as well. The other option are SSDs. I've got more disparate SSDs knocking around than anything else. There were things like this. These Kingston drives, you'll probably see them a lot of them floating around, and this was, I think it was only £18 when I bought it, and 120 gig. But when you consider it, 120 gig is not a lot of storage. You hook up a few of these, it's still not going to be much in terms of storage. The prices per gig of SSD, as opposed to, per gig or per tera, whatever you call it, per terabyte of SSD, is still double that of spinning Rust. And you still have to be careful with the various cache sizes. Some of the cheaper SSDs are fine in short bursts, but if you're doing a consistent long write, they'll hold a decent write rate for a while until the cache fills, and then it'll fall off a cliff. You've got to do your research on what drives you're going to be spinning up, and I'm hoping that by the next video I've got an answer to this. So where do you find the drives? That's a good one. Normally I would have said commercial enterprises, but there are issues with that. Many of the commercial enterprises on the server side, they're not running SATA. They're not running SATA drives. They're running SAS drives. Now, I think that I'm correct in saying that SATA itself is a subset of the SAS standards. So you can probably hook up a SATA drive to a SAS controller, maybe, but you probably won't be able to do it the other way around. So if you get hold of a commercial server with SAS drives in it, you probably won't be able to use that in your home environment. You would have to use the server itself. Yeah. And also, typically many organizations are now taking to actually physically crushing the server hard drives that they dispose of, rather than simply wiping them, because it actually costs money to wipe the drives. More money to actually have members of staff actually going through, running all the software, setting everything up on a bench and wiping, secure erasing hard drives, than it does to just pile them all up and chuck them in a hard drive crusher. It's less cost for a company to do that. In some cases, you may find some on eBay, because some organizations need a certificate, and in order to do that, some of them will hand over the drives to an external company who will give them a certificate to say, yes, these are going to be secure destroyed, and they will take on the burden of secure erasing the hard drives so that they can be reused. And a lot of the commercial hard drives are still spinning rust, are still this type, only they're typically the smaller form factor these days. You may be lucky, there may still be a window, whereas somebody is getting rid of a NetApp. Now, some of the NetApp storage not only had SAS banks, but they had lower cost SATA banks, which were drawers full of SATA drives. And if you're lucky, you may come across those, and one of those will give you a fair chunk of drives from which you may be able to find a few that you can trust and keep a few as spare in order to do this. Yeah. Running the NetApp itself would chew up a fair amount of power. Yeah. But even those, the new ones are all, I believe, are all SAS. Modern servers are starting to go over to SSDs. The reason why I do suggest the NetApp is because some of the drives are what's called enterprise drives, and the enterprise drives are built to different standards than the average drive you can get as a consumer. They're set to last more, they're built to take more hammer. They've usually sometimes got a longer warranty, although if an organization is throwing out some hard drives, you can pretty much assume that the warranty is going to be dead before you even get there. But you never know. It is always a possibility. Enterprise servers are starting to use SSDs, but they are typically, this isn't one. I don't have an enterprise SSD, I don't think. Enterprise SSDs are, for the start, they're normally SAS rather than SATA. The connectors are the same, but it's a different controller that's expected. They're talking effectively a different language. And the enterprise SSDs, they cost an arm and 6 legs, pretty much. They're quite expensive, and they're typically used, rather than the bulk of storage, they are being used as cache. So you've got the concept of temperature, data temperature. Hot data is kept on the faster storage, and then you've got slower archive storage, and the SANs themselves will have intelligent controllers which will shift the data around between hot and cold storage, or even lukewarm in some cases, rather than a simple two-tier system. They'll have multiple tiers, and they will shift the data around themselves between the different levels. But again, they're typically, by the time you get your hands on them, they would have typically taken a hell of a hammering, and they will be the wrong interface. However, commercial desktops may be a possibility. If not now, then possibly in about 5 years. What's happening is a change, and that change has been happening for a number of years now, in that desktops would typically come with spinning rust. They'd come with a hard drive, usually like this, and the standard commercial desktop was typically coming with a 500 gigabyte blue hard drive. Not that big when you consider that some of the terabytes we end up lying around after you've run RAID sets for a few years, but for some people big enough. And all they're typically used for is for the operating system these days. A lot of the files are kept on network shares or on the cloud somewhere. So it reached a point where having 500 gig on the desktop, maybe a terabyte if you're lucky, of slowish storage was useless. If you are only using, do I have one that's outside the case? No, I don't. They're all in the cases. If all you're using the desktop for is for an operating system, then something like this Kingston running at 120 gig would be fine. It would be faster than the spinning rust. 120 gig was more than enough. And what are these going for now? Probably bugger all. If you can still get them, in fact. Kingston SSD 120 gig. £19.83. Kingston A400 SSD, 2.5 inch SATA revision 3, 120 gigabytes, £19.83 on Amazon. Yeah, there is an offer, 50 of them at £19.51. But again, in a year or two, you will start to get systems, commercial desktops, which are thrown away, and they will have SATA SSDs in them, typically of this kind of size. For this cost, for a commercial environment, boot time is very important when you've got staff who are sitting down waiting for the machine to boot. There is a long-standing argument between employers and unions in that, when do you start getting paid? Do you get paid when you're actually logged onto the system and able to take a call and do productive work, or do you get paid the minute you walk through the door? And in that kind of time, the window between arriving at your desk, switching a machine on, and the operating system starting up and being logged in to have everything ready can be 5 to 10 minutes, or in the case of spinning rust, even more. Some people will come in, switch the workstation on and go and make a cup of coffee, chat with their colleagues, and then come back to the desk, and the system will be ready to be logged on. So putting the SSDs in does make the system snappier, even though it's still on the SATA interface, because you're not dealing with the mechanical side of the hard drives and data fragmentation, which can, the longer it runs, the worse the data fragments on the hard drive, and you've got problems. So in a few years, you will probably find SATA SSDs coming down in price. Well, sorry, not coming down in price. You'll find commercial desktops which are being got rid of, and the odds are they will have SSDs in them. Not necessarily to the largest, shall we say. I did actually do some maths here somewhere. I got some prices down, and yeah, the cheapest 1 terabyte SSD that I can find was about £60. That meant that 12 terabytes, if you were to get 12 of those drives and put them together, you're looking at £720. If you mirror them, in other words get 24 and run a mirror, you're looking at £1,440. If you go for spinning Rust, you can get a 12 terabyte red Western Digital for £340. Get a second one to mirror it out, and you're looking at £620. That's less than half the price. That is the current price differential between the spinning Rust and the SSD. The SSDs can be had in larger terabyte sizes, but you're still paying more money. However, in about 5 years, things will probably be very different, and this kind of technique may be of use to you. I think is it Seagate that's actually selling the hard drive segment? I think it's Seagate. This hit the news a few weeks ago. Yep. Seagate announces layoffs, accused of selling hard drives to Huawei. Seagate Technology Holdings shares were battered Wednesday on a double dose of negative news. The data storage company announced it would lay off 8% of its workforce, and a report claimed that the US is accusing the firm of violating export rules by selling hard drives to China's Huawei Technologies. This is October 26th. This is actually about 3 days ago. So the long story short is Seagate have taken a hell of a hit, and the sales of their traditional hard drives, spinning Rust, has taken a hell of a toll. It's no real surprise, given that even on the commercial desktops, SSDs are taking over from spinning Rust. Something like this is going to happen. And also what is being said, that because of, at one point there was a chip shortage, but that chip shortage did not really include RAM chips, which are what SSDs are based on. In fact, there is predicted to be a glut of RAM chips in the marketplace. So prices of SSDs over the next few years are expected to take quite a bit of a nosedive. So the price issue between SSDs and spinning Rust at the minute, there's still a reasonable gap, but over a very short couple of years, expect that gap to close. At which point, there's going to be quite an attraction to getting hold of terabytes of SSDs on SATA and running them at home on a consumer basis. There's a big change coming. So if you get hold of, if friends, colleagues, whatever, update their personal machines and send those machines your way, the odds are that you're probably going to be dealing with M2s. The latest laptops that are being bought are starting to have M2s on board in different form factors. There are different sizes of M2s, and I think this can only take, this can actually take 3 different sizes of M2s. You can probably see the holes in the back, and that would be where, you can probably see the gold holes, and that would be where the screws would go in to hold down different sizes of M2 drives. But if someone is getting rid of an old laptop, at the moment, when the laptops that are being gotten rid of now were being manufactured, if they would typically have a 1 terabyte or more spinning rust, or if they had an SSD on them, it would be more conservative, maybe 200 gig, maybe 500 gig if you were lucky. So you can, between the consumer market and the commercial market, it's still a bit odd. You can still get these technologies, but even with the SSD side of things, I would caution that you've got to be aware of the cache sizes and the performance of the SSDs in order to make them work together in the same set. Exactly how much tolerance I don't know. I'm hoping to bring that to you in a future video. As an aside, this is a bit of an oddity. This is a parallel ATA SSD. So if you know your interfaces, that is the parallel ATA, also known as IDE interface. I'm not sure if you can see that very well, but there are all the pins. Probably best if I show that side. Those are all the pins. And you can actually get hold of these. They are typically twice expensive as the SATA SSDs because there's not many of them sold. But one of the things, I got this because I'm an Acorn freak. Well, not so much of an Acorn freak as Acorn BBC Micro, and this, I came across this, which is a portable hard drive holder. It wasn't actually made by Acorn themselves. Somebody else bought the Acorn brand and made this, and I thought, you know, I've got to have that. But the interface inside is parallel ATA. So I can now put that back in there. And parallel ATA was not exactly the best interface. Pins are very delicate. I just got to make sure I got that lined up correctly. In fact, I may leave this for another time where I can actually spend a bit more time over it. Or have I actually managed to get it in already and I don't know about it? I don't know. But you have got to take a bit of care over that. You can get parallel ATA drives. So if you happen to have something at home, like I have, I've got a DVI, a PVR, sorry, personal video recorder, and I've also got some Xboxes, and in those, right, that's in. And I can close that up again now. That way. I think that's only about 100 gig, but it's just like a bit of history, bit of fun, and that presents to USB. Oddly enough, that is a USB-A, as opposed to USB-B or micro USB or anything like that. So finding a USB-A to A. Not that straightforward, but it is old USB, it's just there. You can actually, when they die, if they have IDE interfaces, you can get SATA drives to replace the previous old spinning rust that was in them. You can also get these, which are SATA to IDE converters. So you've got the SATA to one side, IDE on the other, and you have power, which is brought onto the board to power the SATA side of things. And I think this is bidirectional. This is by a company called StarTech. Now, in my case, I have my Xboxes, original Xboxes, which run on IDE, and I have hardware modified them so that they can take different hard drives. And I've got these in them, StarTechs. There are different types. The StarTechs can seem a bit expensive, but some of the other types have failed. So sometimes trying to save money doesn't always work. But if you've got older technology that you want to keep running, you can keep it running. When the PVR downstairs eventually packs up, I will replace that with one of these and an SSD. I'll take the spinning rust out, and I will expect to get many more use out of the personal video recorder than I otherwise might. Because, you know, it's all useful tech. It still works. Why throw it away? So that kind of technology exists. So now you know where I'm coming from on this. There are ways of using disparate hard drives in tower systems and getting them to work under a resilient or redundant stroke resilient configuration. And one of the things that will be on people's minds is what happens when a drive goes down, because it's a disparate drive. How are you going to replace the thing, and how are you going to get the different sizes to work together in any form of fashion on RAID? That's going to be the trick. That's where we're going to use ZFS on partitions as well as drives, and I'm hoping that the auto grow function will open the door to giving to allowing the RAID set to actually grow over time as drives die and they're replaced with new ones. So that's pretty much how it's all going to hang together. It's all possible. I just need some feedback on the tolerance side of things, which I should get in a few days. It's going to take me longer than that to prep up for the next video anyway in this series. And yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think it should all be possible. And yeah, using Linux, not open Indiana, or because pretty much Open Indiana, Open Solaris was all based on Unix rather than Linux. So some of the commands were different. Plus, Linux has a lot more impetus going forward, especially for the home user. And there's going to be lots of options. So that's where I'm intending to go with this. Next video, we will be at the whiteboard or paper thingy, whatever, and we're going to go through some setups. I'm going to, for those unacquainted with RAID, I'll take you through a few setups and which of those setups we're going to be using in this and why. And a few things to actually watch out for in terms of interface placement and that sort of thing. And then in part 3, we should be able to actually do it on hardware. All good stuff. So, yeah, I think that's about it for now. You guys take it easy, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, ciao for now.